morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and for the kind applause before you even heard me speak, so that's very encouraging, thank you. Today I'll be talking about what it's like to be a tech lead. This talk is aimed mostly to people who are senior engineers or people who are principals that want to see how the leadership aspect of technology can be. I think it would be useful for tech leads who maybe just want to hear a different perspective. You know, they've done something in their life, they want to hear about how somebody else does it, maybe find validation, or maybe just find, something different that they haven't tried yet. And then I also think this is useful for people in senior leadership that want to guide people into the role of tech lead and find ways to maybe help them develop in a certain direction. So you'll find something for everybody. Tech leading is a generic term. Very different companies will have very different names, and not all the responsibilities will necessarily match one-to-one. For example, these days my title is engineering manager, my title before used to be tech lead. It's not exactly the same, but it's same enough. So take it as a broad concept. So this is a brief overview of what I'll talk about. So I'll just go through a little bit about myself so you can understand where my examples and idea come from, a bit of my past experiences. I'll open on the concept of what it is to be a tech lead, talk about the responsibilities of a tech lead, and then move on to product teams, some tips, some metrics, and then I'll close up with conclusions on what's good, bad, and ugly about this job. So I've had a pretty conventional background. So I went to computer science high school, I took a bachelor in computer engineering in Italy, and then I did a master's in software engineering in London. And then I progressed a career as a software engineer. I still define myself software engineer, whatever role I have. And I worked first for Reed Elsevier, for Microsoft, at Skype, and then at ThoughtWorks, where I became a tech lead, and I worked there as a tech lead, both in Italy and in the UK. And nowadays, I work for Flow, which is a company whose purpose is to better healthcare for women and girls all over the world as an engineering manager. I think what's relevant in the plethora of experiences that I've had is that actually there doesn't make much difference in which domain you worked or which tech stack you worked. So as you can see there in the list, I won't go into too many details, but I've worked in quite a few different domains and quite a few different tech stacks. And whether it was architecture, cloud, or whatever I was doing, there was always an aspect of consultancy, so kind of advisory, trying to help people, so maybe people become stronger tech leads or other roles, and also delivery. And in all of this, at the end of the day, I feel that the responsibilities that I've grouped are the ones that I think are most relevant and are needed in a team, whether it is one individual to do it or more. So, what is a tech lead? So a tech lead for me is somebody that wears many, many hats. As in they wear many, many different roles throughout, even throughout a day, to be honest. I sometimes switch roles within the same meeting, definitely within the same week. That means you have to be ready to be versatile in that sense, to be able to help your team. So one of the roles that you have is being the architect of your team. That doesn't mean that you make all the decisions or either that you do all of that in isolation. It means that you are responsible for the technical strategy of your team and where you want your architecture and technology to go. And this is a bit bigger than just the technology. It's going to be also how you would like your team to be, how you would like your delivery to be. So it's a little bit more stretched. So it is a higher level concern, and you want to make sure that it's something flexible that you can change in time. It's something that would make you proud. And I would also recommend that the best expression of your architecture is going to be when every single one of your team members feel they've been part of it, and you have just guided them through. But it's not only high-level concerns. So you want to make sure that you can also be a handyman. And by that I mean, be a servant leader. Do whatever is needed. If you need to fix the stand-up rota, you're not above fixing the stand-up rota. Fix the stand-up rota. If they need a cup of coffee that day, bring the cup of coffee. This job is not just about doing, beautiful engineering excellence, the diagram and conversation. It's about taking care of your team, whatever they need, whether it's small refactoring, whether it's coffee, or whether it's something else. And many people become tech leads being software engineers. It's not always the case. I would recommend this to some extent, but what I want to point out with this is ideally we managed to carry on being software engineers in that role. And I know myself as personal experience how difficult it can be to find the time to code with your team when you have a more of a leadership position, but it's something that the more you can keep close to it, and I don't mean full time, but as much as you can, the better off you will be and your team will be. And it's not because you want to control the small details, it's because you want to be in touch with the problems still. Another aspect that I am really keen on is quality, and it's because I see quality as a very technical and high-level concern of your team, and a concern that it goes hand to hand with your architecture. So when I design architecture, I think about the quality strategy for it. So when you look at how you guide your team, you also have to put the quality hat on and make sure that you proactively encourage your people to think that way, but also that you can guide them through that. Next one is diplomat, which is a little bit more original in the sense that you now lead not only software, but you lead people too with that software. And people will have disagreements, and it can be your stakeholders, it can be your team members, but conflict resolution is going to be one of the skills that you will have to master, because solving problems with people tends to be more difficult than solving problems with software, which is probably where you come from when you move from senior to tech lead. So you already mastered that. The next one is therapist, and this is a very controversial one because some people just have a different perspective on it. So I think that if you're lucky enough that your team members are willing to share their private life to some extent with you, you can better serve them. You can find a way for them to work flexibly. You can understand why they had a fight with somebody. You can understand why they're underperforming one day and overperforming another. And that's going to help you grow them, and it's going to help you grow your system and grow your delivery. I am a strong believer that you have one system. Your team is your software, your people, and your process as one thing. So when you act on any of those variables, you're helping the entire system. And the human aspect is not something that you can dismiss. And then craft person. I like to think that we build things as engineers in our teams, and that you want to cultivate that culture of like the satisfaction of building something as a group or as an individual, and that quality aspect of it. And last but not least is the carer. So as you see this lady in the picture, she's taking care of the plants. That's very much how I see a tech lead. So you don't build the plants, but you do care for the plants. You will make sure that they are in their proper vase. You will make sure they're fed. You will make sure that the right plants are sitting next to each other. You will do everything that is needed to create an environment that will let them grow. And that's part of your role. And that is true for your software too, by the way. You want to make sure that you give it appropriate attention, but people is usually more the neglected part from people who are, highly technical. So let's move on to the next part, which is what are the responsibilities? So to me, first and foremost, your first delivery, the responsibility is sustainable delivery. And that is why, it's simply because we code for money, I like to say. Now, most of us do this as a job, and some of us also do this as a passion. But being able, as a tech lead hired by a company, to deliver sustainable value is your key responsibility. And I've chosen those two words on purpose, because we tend, as tech leads, to lean usually on one side or the other of the spectrum. So either we go for delivery, you ship whatever thing you can under pressure, or you go to, this has to be the pinnacle of engineering excellence, and it takes a million ages and probably doesn't bring the same return on investment as the money you spent to build it. So when I talk about sustainable delivery, I mean you're building a flow of value of features that are not necessarily the most expensive that you can build, but there are things that will not break in production and discredit your company. There are things that will not cause a lawsuit because you exposed user data. It's sustainable delivery of value, and that is where the skill is, in finding that middle ground, which isn't I'll do the minimum possible from a quality perspective, is what's the best thing I can do within my constraints in a sustainable manner regularly, not only this week, on a regular basis. Next one for me is to grow the system. So as I mentioned before, You are tasked with taking care of a microcosmos, and you have to do the best you can to shield them, to protect them, to grow them, to create the environment, to compensate also. So according to the skill set that you have in the team, and it could be because of how the team was designed, or it could be a specific skill set of individuals that might be there or not, you want to make sure that you compensate for what's missing too. And I put this slide here because I want to always point out that you can work in as many teams as you want. The problems you will find will be different. And it doesn't mean that you don't carry the experience of some of the context. But you will have to find a solution for each of your individual, for each of your code base. So just have that. I would always recommend to have that approach, to consider every problem as fresh. And just go in, just with your experience from the past, not with the example of the past. And the next one, very, very important, is technical strategy. Now, technical strategy defines, I think, the job very much. And technical strategy is composed by many, many components, and some of them will be more or less important according to the context, but usually you will need all of them to some extent. And let's go a little bit further in that. So the first thing I would do in a team is always understand where I am. So what is the current state? What's the architecture? What are the problems with the people? What are the flaws in my process? And then with the team, I will try and identify what's our North Star. So where do we want to get to? If we didn't have constraints, what would we do with our system? How would the system be designed? How our architecture would look like? How would our test pyramid look like? How would this team look like if we could? And once we have an agreement on how that looks like, for me, those are guiding rules for all the decisions that we make from that point onwards. Very unlikely that you have the budget to go and fix everything at that point in time. Probably is not even the objective, but the objective is for you people to be focused in a specific direction, and that direction changes at time, you do it together, but is to allow your team, A, to be focused, and B, to allow your team to make decisions when you are not there that are aligned to an overall strategy. So let's talk a little bit more about your North Star. So one aspect, as I mentioned before, is your architecture. How do you see yourself going forward? How does it look like? Do you have that in a diagram, multiple diagram, different dimensions, whatever is relevant for your system? Another aspect is quality. Again, to me, architecture and quality go hand in hand. You design how you test something before you design anything. I am a firm believer that if it can't be tested, you probably shouldn't have it in production. So everybody has their own, sit somewhere in the spectrum of quality, that's mine. So when you look at quality is also, generally how, your observability, many aspects of your quality. Then we have security. So when we go to like a happy scenario where every and each of one of your team members has strong security knowledge, and whenever you have to introduce a new system, people say, does the surface of risk increase? How can we mitigate this? Or you have regular threat modeling sessions. So going from like really happy scenarios to wherever you can be, your North Star is deciding what would make sense for your group of people and your system, and write it down somewhere so you can start building a direction of where you want that to improve. And then we have risk. I call risk all the parts of my system and team that will keep me up at night. It's not any piece of tech debt. It's the piece of system that if it breaks, the company goes out of business, that we'll get a lawsuit for, that somebody will quit the company if they have to be woken up at night again to go fix that. That is my risk. So my risk will be a subset of my debt in general, so my tech debt, but it will be the part that will have bigger consequences if not addressed. And also is the one that you will have the best leverage to convince your product manager to give you capacity to do that, and whether it's your senior leadership or whoever you need to convince for capacity, because those are the ones that will bring you out of business. And then there's performance, because I think when we look at that, usually, to me that is the work, is the delta between where you are and where you want to be in your North Star. And usually that will be divided between things that are risks, things that you need to remove, You know, whatever is missing in your security, whatever is missing in your quality, but also improvements. So performance is there as a very generic term of all the things that you would like to make better, but you would not go out of business if you don't change them. So things that might make you, you know, maybe more performant or quicker or like easier to maintain. So things that are improvements, but are not necessarily keeping you up at night. And it's also important for a company to focus on those. So next one is cost. As in, all of this is nice, but do we actually have the budget to take care of all these things? So the solution here is to look at, always make sure that you have an understanding of whether the return on investment on what you're doing is proportional to, you know, what you want to embark on. And that's why risks are really important, because that's the way to address some problems that you might have in your system and to have the entire company back you up, because there's clear business consequences. And then last but not least is your people. People build software. So if you don't grow your people won't be able to write good software for you, good systems and everything else. Now, I usually see this as a very big opportunity to have a North Star, because to me it's a space where I also find opportunities for my people to do the job that grow them. And I usually have with them maybe some directions where they would want to go or know some of their, you know, areas of growth. And I'm trying to find the intersection that helps the people and the software and the company. And it's not always easy, so it's still, you know, a big piece of work to do. So when we talk about technical strategy, wrapping up to that point, I see the technical strategy as the how we go from where we are to our North Star. And that is why the tech lead helps with that. So how do we do this? So you won't get to do all of this all at once. You will have to identify how much of each you can do at what point in time and change the scales and do a bit of one and a bit of the other. And it's very difficult, and nobody will give you the magic formula. It depends on your conditions in your team. And then we go to stakeholders. I could write an entire other talk on the difference between people who are informant and people who are stakeholders. Let's say stakeholders are the people who actually have a stake in the matter of your team, and they need to be listened to, and they will have requirements. And what will happen often is they will have conflicting requirements, or you simply won't have capacity to do product direction, you know, department direction, stakeholders direction, and so on and so on. You're lucky when there is an intersection. So what you do in this case is clearly you try your best to find areas of intersection with the various things, but also I think the most important skill here is to manage expectations. So the worst scenario is when every stakeholder thinks they're going to get everything they asked for. So it's much better to say this is what we can and this is why, and you know, this is all direction, than try and keep everybody happy and then at the end in a little bit have everybody unhappy. Saying no is very much a tech lead responsibility when it's needed, and managing the expectation. And then we have cost-value evaluations. I put this in a separate slide because this is something you do weekly, you know, if not daily. Whenever there is a new feature, a new sub-project, a new area of your website, whatever you're doing, there's going to have to be some technical design being done. And what you want to guide your team towards is having that mindset of identifying solutions of different cost. And again, it's not the best option to have, you know, what's the quickest, dirtiest thing that I can push to production, but it's not even the best option to say, this is the maximum cutting edge that we can do. It will cost us 6 months of work when we need to bring this out in 3 or 1. So understanding that there are different options with different tech debt sacrifices, with different risk sacrifices and so on, and finding the best, cleanest, best from an engineering perspective option within your constraints is something you want to flex your team to do. Next one. So I think this is, so although those are responsibilities, like things to do with your team, this is the skill of the tech lead. One of the best advice I've been given, or when I was a tech lead for the very first time, was that most of this job is about knowing what the things to do are and drawing a line to what you can do today and what you can't do today, accept what you can't do, and be absolutely sure that you're prioritizing the most important things at the top. Because some stuff will not get done, so you better hope that what you pick to do is the best thing you can do. And it's a very challenging thing, especially if you're moving into this role, because as senior engineers, you are rewarded for, the marvel of your creation. Well, as a tech lead, you have to manage a different kind of system. So knowing how to prioritize things, and I don't just mean the task you do today, but the meeting with the stakeholder, the problem of your team member, your incidents in production, the next delivery, all of this thing all at once is going to be the key skill to be in a technical leadership position. And then in general, I call this the art of balance, because that's how it can feel. So you're walking on a rope, and you have all this responsibility, and your job is to keep everything standing, right, at the best of your effort. So let's talk about product teams. So when I think of a product team, I think of a team that is aligned with domain, that is long-lived, is not based on a specific feature or project, is based on a specific domain, and people tend to stay there for longer. And I see a team as a little run, let's call it family run, group of friends run business in a house. And I see the team as the three components of this house. So it is the people that live in it, the house itself, so the technology. What is the infrastructure around them that allows them to do a certain job? And the process, the logistic, is how they do the job. So let's pretend this group of people in this house bake cakes. Small group of friends, they run a business, and they sell cakes, and they bake them at home. So what the kind of oven would be and how they use it is going to be, the technology they have and the process they have. And the people that live in it need to coexist, need to collaborate, need to find a way to find their identity in that group. And that scales up to the company and the product, from my perspective. So every team is its own little world, but they will have similarities, very likely, if they are in the same neighborhood. And there are problems that are common. So if one of the houses is on fire, this is a problem for everybody. But if your neighbor rearranges the furniture, not your concern. So there's going to be times when you have to rebuild the roads, because that's common, and there's going to be times when you don't pay necessarily attention to what's happening in the other. And again, that's very important as a tech lead, to know your space in relation to your colleagues and to the product. That doesn't mean that if a neighbor asks you for help, you don't, you will. But understanding the boundaries between neighbors in a neighborhood is the kind of relationship I would recommend. Which goes next to how do you coexist? Clearly, there are many, many aspects that can be addressed. One of that is very important to me is the culture of constant improvements. And again, there's a spectrum. We all look at the best possible option, but I think what's most important is the collaboration of always trying to do something a little better. Even if it's, painting the walls yourself, like you see in the picture, is that culture of, it doesn't matter exactly what I'm doing, but I believe that every day we try and do something a little bit better together, and that is one of the most important takeaways for a group of people. The next one for me is holistic quality. So holistic quality is a concept of looking at quality in a holistic manner. So instead of thinking of quality as your tests or your QA, or your test pyramid, you look at quality as something that can't be removed from, let's say, your system. It's something that is part of your system, but can't be addressed as one single part. And to do that, you address it from an architectural and code and people perspective. So you have to approach it from different perspectives. And that is a culture of constant quality that you want to instill in your team, in my opinion. If you're interested, I did a talk on it. It's called TDD and Other Drugs. You'll find it on YouTube. It's focused, the entire talk is on this. So the next one is building habits. Habits are a double-edged sword, but they do work. So I think of it as, your morning coffee could be, your stand-up, or having regular time for certain meetings is very important. And this is one of the key also techniques in many industries. So you want people to have a rhythm for things. Where it becomes a problem is when people stop thinking. So you want to make sure that your habits, your processes are something that is truly felt by the team, something they really want, and that you're ready to change them when they want to do something else. So your process is a tool for your team, it's not the structure of your team, but having that process for a certain period of time, for a certain subset of people, will help grow productivity. And then I'm a big advocate for diversity, not only in society in general. I'll stick to my development teams, but I do think that the best systems are developed with the most different group of people. And if I go back to my example of the cake, I would hope that my cake has, spices from all over the world, and that the people in the group will have, any kind of gender identity, or come from different countries, or speak as many languages, and have parents from every side of the world. Because it actually makes your team better, stronger, your product, your software better, when the people who look at it have completely different cultural perspective. I always see software as a byproduct of an individual or a group, and when the group is diverse, you will have different perspective looking at the possible problems of your system, and it will make it richer, better, more robust. And then we go to motivation. So how do you motivate your team to do the best they can? There's a very interesting book, it's called Drive, has been written by Daniel Pink. I would recommend it. In this book, it suggests that extrinsic motivation, like your pay, pay increase or a bonus, is way more impactful in your productivity than your intrinsic motivation. So the things that make you want to do the job you do, and be happy on a daily basis. And he says there are 3 factors that are key determinator for you to have this intrinsic motivation. The first one is mastery. That is the desire to feel like you are better, you're getting better at the job you're doing, that you can do something well. So if every day you ask your developers to not write tests, to not use the library they should use, if there's that constant frustration, you're not fostering the sense of mastery. That doesn't mean, as I mentioned multiple times in the talk, that you should always go to the extent of cutting edge technology, but the culture of making things the best they can and for them to grow is essential to keep them around. The next one is autonomy, and autonomy is not anarchy. If your small business is building jumpers, people can't build scarves. But if they build a jumper, they can pick which thread, they can pick which needle, they can pick which color, and so on and so on. So full autonomy within the boundaries of the role. It's something that really feels rewarding for people. And last but not least is the sense of purpose. People who wake up in the morning and feel that their job is meaningful, and that could be for many different reasons. It doesn't have to be necessarily a charity, have a better chance to feel motivated to do more and more in their job. So, a few tips. You want to be a role model, and I know that's harsh, and it is difficult to do. But you can't expect your team to behave better than you do. You set the standard. They might do, but you can't expect it from them. If you're not on time in meetings, you can't expect them to be on time in meetings. If you don't do what you say you do, you can't expect them to do what you say they do. And that works also in failure. You don't have to be you don't have to make no mistakes or just be perfect all the time, but you have to be sure to understand that whatever you say is not as relevant as what you do. Next one is to accept that something will always not get done. So I think you will always have a dirty corner of the house that nobody has cleaned for a while, and you will have to deal with that. And I think if that area keeps moving, it's okay. If you always neglect the same area, it's a problem. But part of the growth of being a tech lead is accepting that not everything will get done at that point in time, and you have to coexist with that. The next one is that not everybody will like what you do. You could build the best chocolate cake in the world, somebody will not like chocolate. You are not wrong, they are not wrong. But that's how life is. And it can be hard. It can be hard. And then I like to say, everybody puts their foot in it. So when you fail, you want to fail in a way that is visible to others. You want to say, you know, I made this mistake, this is what I did about it, I'm sharing it with you so you don't repeat it. And people will follow that as an example. So fail openly. Make sure that your failure is an example, and it's not shame, it's this happens, because people make mistakes all the time, and most of them are hidden, and they're a much bigger problem because people will repeat them. But if your mistakes are public, that won't be the case. And then there's the be yourself advice, which many people say bring your real self to work. And it can sound cheesy, and I think it needs to be taken from the right perspective. What I would like your takeaway from this to be is make mistakes that you can own and make successes that you can own. So study, listen to everybody, any advice, and make sure that you are convinced of what you do, but make sure that it is your opinion. So if something goes well or something goes bad, you can say, yes, I thought it would go well for this reason, not because, you know, X person said that. Just own it. Make it yourself. Don't expect your team to be, you know, coming out from a book, because there are different contexts in your book. And then a few metrics, and I purposely didn't write this talk to be academic, you know, a series of different processes and techniques. I'm a big fan of TDD. I won't bore you with that. But I couldn't live without mentioning the four key metrics. I won't describe them. I will just say I think they're better than chocolate. I would suggest you go and have a look at Andrew Hammer-Law's talk on them. I would suggest this should happen in every single, this should be measured in every single team. I will move on to the personal metrics, which I think are a little bit more unusual and might be more interesting for this audience. So I consider the stability of my team based on how much time I have to code. When I don't have time to code, which has happened, it means that I'm firefighting so much with stakeholders, with deliveries, with whatever other problem, that I can't sit down and do like longer term work, like coding with my team, pairing with my team. I'm not suggesting it should be full time. My ideal scenario would be 2 days on 5, but that's how I measure if my team is stable or not, if I have time to go and sit down and code. The second one for me is what happens when I go on holiday. If when you go on holiday, your team reverts back to what they were doing before, there's either a problem in maturity in the team, you haven't been there long enough, or they don't feel like they can talk to you. So that's a problem. What happens when you're not there is way more relevant than what happens when you are there. You want your strategy to carry on even if you're not there. And then this is the pinnacle, and I think you reach it rarely and it doesn't last for long. And it is the point in which, because everything was going well and you've done all the strategy well, people carry on with the decisions without your verbal input. You're there, you don't need to talk, you don't need to be there, but things carry on because your influence, your coaching, everything you've done before works. Consider that just adding a new team member will change this. But this is what I would call the end goal. So let's wrap up with the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what's bad? What's bad, especially when you move from senior to tech lead, is that you are used to a system that is more controlled. You can refactor your system to perfection, your class to perfection. You can have, beautiful API. That sense of satisfaction is clearer. Now you have a system which is composed of human processes, individuals, and software. And that is a much more messy system. So your perception of quality, of what good looks like, is very different, and you have to adjust that. Another one, and this is because, done is better than perfect, which is something you need to repeat yourself a couple of times a day. I think another thing that you notice is the loneliness. So before you're still part of the team, but before you were one of the team. And now you are the tech lead, so to some extent you're still a role model. So if you want to complain about somebody, you can't complain to your own team members about other team members. And it can be hard to be the role model. And you probably shouldn't complain with your manager either, because you would show your team for one day that they're off instead of 364. So it can be hard to both be a role model and not be, being able to do the things you used to do before as a senior. But those are things that come with the job. The things that are actually really, really hard are these two. One is the fact that you have to say no. Say no is your responsibility. But it can be hard. Sometimes you want to say yes to your team members because they really want to do something, and it's your job to say no. You have to say no to some stakeholders, and so on and so on. So it can be hard. It doesn't make you popular. It's much easier when you can say yes to people. And the other one is that you have to be the system of justice in your team. So you want to make sure that you give equal opportunities, and you want to make sure that when there's a conflict or somebody's being discriminated or just mistreated, you actually act there, which is more than what you used to do. It's more than your technology. It's like making sure that you have a safe space for your team. It can be hard. And then what's good? So to me, what's good is that I see people growing. So whether it is in adverse conditions or people already very, very talented, and in general to be able to look up, my delivery, how people have grown, how the systems have improved, for me is worth all of this. So to wrap up, I think as a tech lead, you need to be like water between the rocks. You're smoothing the surface, you're smoothing some of the rocks, moving some of the rocks. You're making everything seem smooth and filling the gaps of what's missing while you help things get better. But you also have to be like the sunset, so you have to bring your energy, your experience, and be able to walk away and see what happens when you're not there, which takes courage. Couple of books I would recommend. I think I've mentioned them before in the talk. And then I'm happy to take questions.